With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey. This is a bunch of stuff, deal.
What does that mean, a bunch of stuff?
Well, it means it's simply inaccurate.
It's Irish.
It's Irish. It is. We Irish call it malarkey.
Thanks for the translation.
No,
Okay.
We Irish call it malarkey.
You know what this is? Yeah, and I reserve this word for those rare instances when it's truly deserved. This is malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Direct from the King Spring Studios in beautiful Smyrna, Georgia. This is a bunch of malarkey. Now, here's your host, the incredible Charlie McMahon.
Welcome to another episode of A Bunch of Malarkey. And thank you to Scott Shannon for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to all of you for tuning in yet again. We are making our way through the month of October. World Series time set for Tuesday. Unfortunately, my Yankees were eliminated. It'll be the Washington Nationals against the Houston Astros. So let's go Washington. You know what, folks? There's so many people on social media today, and since the Yankees were eliminated, or whenever their team is eliminated, that are so bitter and upset. And about 20 years ago, when I was in my 20s, I would get really upset and take it so personally. But do you really think these guys that are making $15, $20 million a year give a shit? Of course they want to win. That's what they do. They play to win. But now they go home for a few months. They're still making their money. Do you think they care? We take it more seriously and more personally as fans, I think, than these players do. Now, 20 years ago, I would be upset until spring training when the Yankees got eliminated. Upset all those years in the 80s where the Yankees never made the playoffs. It was torture to me. Now it just rolls off. I'm just like, okay, yeah, it sucks. But what can you do? But I think a lot of it has to do with years ago when a team beat the Yankees. They did it with grace. They did it with style. They did it with humility. Nowadays, I think people get more upset because the other team kind of rubs it in the face of the other team with all the celebrations and the bat flips and all this weird celebration out on the field and kind of cockiness. I think that's what rubs people the wrong way and just eats away at them for the next few months. But I'm past that point in life. There was a movie called The Bronx Tale. Robert De Niro was in it. Chaz Palminteri. And there was a great scene in that movie, but the little kid was a Yankee fan. His name was Calogero, which is Italian for Charles. He was upset that the Yankees were eliminated from the 1960 World Series. Bill Mazeroski hit that big home run in 1960 in Game 7, and the kid was still upset over it. And the mobster, played by Chaz Palminteri, said, "Does Mickey Mantle? What are you getting upset for? Does Mickey Mantle pay your rent? In other words, you're more upset than Mickey Mantle was at the time. Mickey Mantle's making his money, he's living the life, and you're sitting here crying over a baseball game." So that's kind of the approach I've taken over the last few years when my teams are eliminated. Listen, I come from New York, as you all know. I've been spoiled. I've seen the Giants win 4 Super Bowls. I've seen in my lifetime the Yankees win 7 World Series. My New York Islanders, 4 Stanley Cups in a row, although it's been over 30 years. I've been spoiled. There are a lot of teams, a lot of places in the country where your team doesn't ever win. So I'm not going to complain. So on to bigger and better things. So this past weekend, that Florida got hit by some tornadoes from this tropical storm Nestor. Now, where do they come up with these names for these tropical storms? I mean, the name storms of 2019. Now, first of all, Nestor, the only Nestor I've ever known was Nestor the long-eared donkey. It was a Christmas special growing up in the 80s. If you're too young or don't remember Nestor the long-eared donkey, Google it or put it in YouTube and it'll come up. Nestor the long-eared donkey. He was a donkey who had long ears. He was made fun of. And it's a whole religious story that he was the donkey that took the Virgin Mary across the desert. And then he was beloved at the end, even though he had the problem with his long ears. He was mocked. And then he becomes the hero, like in every children's thing. But these name storms, folks, of 2019, let's go over them real quick. We had Andrea, pretty normal. Barry. All right, Barry White, Barry Manilow, Chantel, okay, Dorian, Aaron, Fernand, not Ferdinand, Fernand, Gabrielle, Humberto, Imelda, Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, just had Nestor. If there are any more, it'll be Olga, then Pablo, Then Rebecca, but spelled all fucked up, Rebekah. Then Sebastian, spelled oddly also, Sebastien instead of A-N. And we got Tanya. And then we got Hurricane or Tropical Storm Van. That's it, like Van. Not Van Halen, Van Morrison, just Van. They just, Van sounds good. And then Wendy. Wendy. So those are the names. So I understand how they come up, how they, the committee, the National Weather Service names these, but come on, folks. Olga. And then, I can understand Ferdinand, but Fernand? I don't know anybody. I've never met a Fernand. Even Dorian is weird. Imelda. And then there's Cameron, who complains to the manager that there's not enough wind. Lorenzo. I like Lorenzo. But Nestor. I just laughed when I heard Nestor. I thought of the donkey bearing down. So a lot of these names, they're like kind of new names, but a lot of these names are kind of like old sounding. Like Olga. You picture some old European, like Russian or something, beating the hell out of you. Olga. So some of those names sound old. And speaking of old, folks, did you hear this story about the nursing home in North Carolina where the employees were running like a fight club? 3 employees at a North Carolina assisted living facility are accused of allowing elderly residents to fight one another and encouraging them to fight, and in one case, even assaulting a resident themselves. Marilyn McKee, 32 years old, Tanisha Tyson, 20 years old, and Tanisha Jordan, 26, have all been arrested and charged, according to a police report. A report of elder abuse was made to Winston-Salem police, and it accused the employees of allowing residents to fight one another and provoking the fights. They were running like a fight club here at the assisted living facility. And even one of those employees shoved a resident. According to the police report, no injuries were reported or discovered. Tyson and Jordan are facing 1 count each of assault on an individual with a disability, which occurred at the Danby House Assisted Living Facility in Winston-Salem, according to a report. McKay is facing 2 counts of the same charge, and they're all scheduled to appear in court on November 14th. You know the first rule about Fight Club, folks. So, I mean, seriously, folks, I wonder if there was bets going on where they would get the 2 people to fight, and then they would just toss money. I wonder if anybody else was involved in this, or if it was just pure joy of seeing people fight. She got some sick fucks out there, folks. But I'm willing to bet, no pun intended, that there was some gambling going on. You get the old lady in the walker against the guy with Alzheimer's in the rocking chair. I'm willing to bet that there was some money being tossed back and forth on these. So if that doesn't segue perfectly into our favorite segment, folks, I don't know what does.
A bunch of malarkey.
Mutant of the Week.
Now here's Charlie.
So last week, we had a pretty good race. We had the prenuptial nincompoop, the guy who robbed the bank the day before his wedding so he could pay the venue and pay for his wedding ring, against the Big Lots loony, the woman who was shoplifting in Big Lots and then climbed up into the ceiling and led the police on a crawling chase throughout the store and shut the store down for a few hours. Well, we have a winner based on your votes, and it's the prenuptial nincompoop. He beat the Big Lots loony 58 to 42%. So thank you all for voting. As you know, voting for the Mutant of the Week occurs on our Facebook page, and our poll goes up every Tuesday morning bright and early before you're even up for work, and that runs through midday or so on Saturday. So you have 5 full days to vote, and it was a close race, so every vote counts, folks, so make sure you vote, and make sure you tell your friends to vote. You could even share the poll on your Facebook page. When you see it come up on a bunch of Malarkey's Facebook page, there's a little share button down on the bottom right. You know how to share. I don't have to explain. You guys have been on Facebook for 10 years. You know how to do it. Share the poll. Let your friends in on the action. So let's go to this week's nominees. We have one. Where else, folks? We have to go to, I believe it's, is it Florida here? Well, we'll get to that. No, it's Tennessee. I'm sorry. We have Tennessee versus Louisiana this week, so I'm sorry, Florida. You're not in this one. So let's go to Tennessee, where a 19-year-old Memphis man was arrested for reaching into his grandmother's underwear and stealing $10 that was hidden there. So many questions. An affidavit posted indicates the victim was wearing those panties when her grandson, Jared Ate, demanded she give him the cash, then took it by force. When she declined, Ate pushed her down on the bed, held her down, raised her dress, and removed $10 from her panties, the document said. The victim reportedly suffered bruising on her arms and leg during the incident. It's not clear why Ate wanted the $10 or how he knew his grandmother had cash in her underpants. Ate is being held on $10,000 bond for the alleged felony robbery. According to ABC's local Memphis News, he is scheduled to go before a judge next Tuesday. So, reaching in your grandmother's panties for $10, you really, really must need money to do that. So we're going to call him, out of Memphis, the Panty Plunderer. So the Panty Plunderer is our first mutant of the week, the guy who plundered $10 out of his grandma's panties. So mutant number 2, we have to go to, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Ouachita Parish, Louisiana, where a man in Louisiana found himself in some hot water. A resident in Ouachita Parish called the police to report a man walking up and down the street yelling and screaming profanities and who appeared to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol on October the 13th. The responding officer observed a white foam coming from the mouth of the man, who has been identified as 27-year-old Jonathan Brandon Porter. He said Porter told him SpongeBob took his paperwork and God has battleships but hasn't sent them out yet. Porter apologized to the police for yelling in the road, but when police tried to put him under arrest, he attempted to pull away. Police say he continued to resist, but deputies were eventually able to place him into handcuffs. Police found meth in the watch pocket of his pants, and Subutex was located in a Tylenol bottle. Porter was charged with disturbing the peace, resisting an officer, and 2 counts of possession of a controlled substance. So SpongeBob stole his paperwork. So we're going to call him SpongeBob Subutex. He is our second mutant nominee, the guy who yelled that SpongeBob took his paperwork and God was sending battleships to destroy us. So we've got a heavyweight battle between the Panty Plunderer out of Memphis, Tennessee, and SpongeBob Subutex out of Louisiana. So make your voices heard, folks. Voting starts on Tuesday on our Facebook page, ends on Saturday. For those new to the show, where are we located, folks? We're located on all major podcast platforms, which include iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, Radio.com, Stitcher, CastBox, YouTube. If you have one of those Echo devices, just say, Alexa, play the podcast, A Bunch of Malarkey, and she will play the most recent episode. You want to get in touch with us, have an idea for a topic, you want to be on the show, you have a friend who can offer something to the show, maybe they're an expert in some field, get in touch with us. You can email us at abunchofmalarkeypodshow@gmail.com. That's abunchofmalarkeypodshow@gmail.com. Leave us a voicemail. Nobody's going to answer the phone. You don't have to talk. I know everybody has a phobia, which we're going to get into phobias and fears today. People have a phobia of talking on the phone these days. Just leave us a voicemail. 706-406-8212. That's 706-406-8212. Leave us a voicemail. Let us know your idea for an upcoming show, or if you want to be a guest by phone, in person, whatever. Get in touch, and you can always get in touch with us on our Facebook page. Either leave a comment or private message us. You know how to do that. You've been on Facebook a long, long time. So we're heading closer to Halloween, folks. We're past the midway point of October. Halloween, less than 2 weeks away, like 10 days away, I think it is, right? About 10 days, 11 days from the time we're recording this show. So everybody's in this mood. We talked about it last week with the scary movie, funny things and stereotypes and cliches in scary movies. So everybody's in the mood to be scared right now by movies and haunted houses. But today we're going to talk about things that scare us all year round, that are, ingrained in us from childhood or in our DNA. Things that scare us even when it's not Halloween, all year round, that are ingrained in us. Now, we had a great president back in the 30s and 40s. His name was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, for those keeping track at home. And he once said that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But it turns out there are a lot of things ingrained in our DNA that dictate exactly what we fear. Why are certain things scary? Some things are scary because they bring us back to negative memories, while others are scary because of the physical response they elicit in our bodies. And while some phobias are downright weird, so everybody's got a weird phobia, like I don't like public restrooms, things like that, there are lots of things that are instinctively scary to humans, and for good reason. Fear is a pivotal component to everyday survival, ingrained in us from our long-lost ancestors, going back to those Neanderthals and cave people. Some of these fears turn to full-blown phobias. But there is no denying that there are universally scary things in nature. Some scientists have suggested fears are passed down through our DNA, meaning that there are certain things we are born to fear. Let's start with the first one. It's a common one, heights. A fear of heights is triggered when your inner ear feels an exaggerated gravitational pull and tells your other senses about it, alerting your body of the distance that exists between you and the ground. If said distance exceeds 30 feet or so, your body goes into panic mode as the eyes send visual signals to the brain. The fear of heights is fascinating because while our body is wired to experience a shift in gravitational pull, we don't develop this fear at birth. A study conducted by scientists from the University of California, Berkeley, managed to pinpoint the exact stage of development when this fear initially surfaces. According to them, this fear is developed after a baby begins to learn locomotor skills, not locomotive, such as crawling or scooting. People only learn to be scared of heights when they begin to get a perception of space and movement. So if you have that fear of heights, folks, it's probably from your DNA or when you started scooting and crawling, that's probably when it developed. Now, people are scared of snakes. The second one on our list. Ancient human beings were tree-dwelling mammals who all too often became food for these vicious snakes. Since the beginning of time, we've been afraid of snakes. Even the Garden of Eden, if you believe that story, Adam and Eve with the snake and the apple, the whole deal. Because of that, our eyes evolved to see colors more vividly. Not so we could see beautiful rainbow pictures and post them on Instagram, but rather to avoid our snake predators. To prove this, a 2011 study showed children can find snakes faster than they can find flowers. In fact, it is our neural fear module that signals this ability. It's like having a built-in snake alarm. So people are afraid of snakes. Now, you know what's helped me? Now, up north on Long Island, I never had to worry about snakes. You would occasionally see a little garden snake. They weren't venomous. I hate when people say poisonous snakes. No, they're venomous snakes. But since I moved to Georgia, you have to be a little bit more alert, and there are a lot more species of snakes, including venomous snakes, here in Georgia, especially copperheads. Now, when I go out, I'm a little more careful of where I'm walking, and especially in like the dry creek beds in my yard and pine straw and stuff like that. But there's a website, folks, that's really helped me. Now, I wouldn't say I've ever been deadly afraid of snakes, but I've been a little nervous about them. There's this Facebook page, and I believe it's a website too, called Snake Identification. Now, what happens is people find a snake in their yard, they take a picture of it, and they post it to this Facebook page, and then the admins, who are snake experts, tell you what kind of snake it is, whether it's venomous or not, and tell you a little bit about the snake, whether it's good for the, a lot of snakes are good. Even the non-venomous ones eat the venomous ones. So they tell you never to kill a snake. Just let it go its way. If it's in an area where you need to walk, just get the hose out and spray it with the hose, and it'll go on its way. More people get bit trying to kill snakes and get rid of them out of the yard than just leaving them alone. So just leave the snake alone. Again, if you have children or dogs in the yard and you don't want the snake there, just grab the garden hose and shoo it along. But that Snake Identification Facebook page has really gotten me I would never, years ago, I probably would have tried to kill a snake if I saw it. Now I won't. I'll just let it live in its normal habitat. If it's in an area I need to go, I'll just get the hose and shoo it along and just let it go away naturally. So snakes are a big fear of people as well. As well, another creepy, crawly kind of thing, spiders. A lot of people are afraid of spiders. The fear of spiders is another built into our DNA thanks to our ancestors. Spiders posed a much bigger threat to humans in ancient times than they do now. Even a non-venomous bite could be lethal back then. Archaeology suggests that the ability to recognize and fear spiders resulted in more surviving offspring for our ancestors. Arachnophobia, or the fear of spiders, is often interlinked with the fear of snakes, which we just went over. What's more interesting is that this fear disproportionately affects women. Female babies, some as young as just 11 months, are already 4 times more likely to fear spiders when compared to boy babies of the same age. This is likely due to the fact that during our hunter-gatherer days, if a woman were bit by a spider, her offspring would likely die without her. At a time when men were warriors and women were caretakers, a spider posed a much bigger threat to women and their children. So, I don't know if you believe in all this from way back when, that it's wired from that long ago, but that seems to be what they're saying here, that it goes back to these ancient times. I don't know how much I believe in that, but that's what it says. That's what my research indicates. You have some people that are afraid of eyes. Do you find yourself avoiding eye contact with that overly friendly passenger on the train or the plane? You might just be following an ancient instinct. Even infants instinctively look away when a pair of eyes they don't recognize looks at them. There's a reason why we call the eyes the windows to the soul. They communicate a lot to other people. A pair of eyes emoting fear or sadness can trigger someone who sees them to react. When your brain picks up on emotive eyes, especially negative ones, it rapidly reacts to the possibility of danger by releasing a flood of aggressive hormones. Similarly, if we see someone looking at us, our brain is also triggered. Called scopophobia, the fear of being watched is an anxiety disorder that was first observed in 400 BC. Humans are instinctively trying to evaluate other animals, including other people. The idea of being watched can initiate fear and affects women at a much higher rate than men. Staring comes instinctively as well. Staring contests in the wild establish dominance, and humans are still reflexively trained to do this to other humans. I can understand why women are bothered more by being stared at, because they're probably always being stared at, especially by men. So I can understand that. So eyes, people are afraid of eyes. So these are like the top. So we're going over the top things people are scared of. Now this one ranks number 1 in a lot of studies and surveys. Public speaking. People don't like to speak in front of other people. That's why they do podcasts and hide behind the microphone. Now, I don't have a problem with public speaking. I never have. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but I don't get really nervous and scared like a lot of people do. What does happen to me when I do public speaking, I really have to have everything organized, my thoughts on like paper and bullet points, because I forget things. I go off the script a little bit. So I do have to organize my thoughts before public speaking, but I don't have a fear of it. But a lot of people do. And it isn't just a fear of awkward high schoolers. It's a universal fear felt by people worldwide. Even people who aren't terrified of public speaking get some of the symptoms associated with the fear. You get the butterflies in the stomach, sweating, you have trouble sleeping the night before, and that's because the root of this fear is built into our DNA. This fear comes from our part of the brain that regulates emotion, reacting to the emotions displayed on each and every face in the crowd, picking them apart to see which, if any, people pose a genuine threat. Specific configurations of facial features can be interpreted as threatening on a primitive level. The end result is a crippling stage fright that most of us have been through at some point in our lives. Our instinct when faced with a sea of faces, especially if they're unfamiliar ones, is not to continue with the presentation, but rather to win what our mind has interpreted as a staring contest. That's why some people, when faced with the reality of public speaking, simply stare blankly into the crowd. For this reason, many people will picture something bizarre, like picturing the audience in their underwear to overcome their glossophobia. So that's what it's called, glossophobia. Now, I think it's a fear of being judged, too. People are nervous that people are judging them, maybe how they look, how they speak, what they're wearing, how they're presenting. I think it goes beyond just the DNA, but that's my personal opinion. There's no scientific formula to back up my observations, but I think that's a big part of it as well. Another thing we fear are sudden movements, sounds, or surprises. As it turns out, you can actually be scared to death. That's because humans are hardwired to have physical reactions to being scared by sudden movements, sounds, or surprises. I guess surprise parties aren't all that good. When we're in a normal, undisturbed state, our body is at rest, so to speak. It's kind of, you just, your mind's at rest, your body's at rest. When something occurs, a noise, or someone suddenly comes into a room, feeling your surroundings move unexpectedly, it triggers our startle reflex, something we've developed as a means of survival. This is an intense chemical reaction where adrenaline floods the body and your brain, causing a reaction. Some people love this feeling, which is why haunted houses are so popular, but some people are unable to stop the adrenaline from flowing and are left with a full-blown panic attack. So, I don't like to be startled, really. I hate when my body's fully at rest and then my dog makes a noise in the middle of the night, or it jolts you. It jolts you from the soul. I hate that. And then there's the fear of small spaces, known as claustrophobia. It's considered a learned phobia, but researchers are beginning to believe that this fear could come from our ancestors also. Whenever a human is faced with an obstacle or high-stress situation, the natural evolutionary response is known as fight or flight. This is triggered by the adrenal medulla, which sends hormones to the rest of our body to tell us to either leave the situation or quickly fight it. Claustrophobes experience anxiety in small spaces, turning on the fight or flight response. And those who are not able to quell their fear are thrown into a full-blown physical response to the fear. There are some scientists who believe avoiding small spaces is an instinctual survival mechanism, and those who experience the fight or flight response in small spaces are reacting to a dormant evolutionary means of survival. Small spaces really don't bother me. Although I wouldn't do one of those crazy sleep in the coffin for 30-hour things that these amusement parks do, like Six Flags. They have this contest. If you can sleep in a coffin for 30 hours, you win money or a season pass. I don't think I'd do that. But little spaces don't bother me all that much. If I'm alone, it doesn't bother me. If I'm like in a crowded elevator with a lot of people, it kind of bothers me. Another fear people have is of blood. A lot of people fear blood. Some people don't fear blood, but get queasy when they see it or have it taken from them. And why is that? Science seems to suggest that people who faint or get dizzy at the sight of blood are reacting to an evolutionary fear reflex. When some people bleed, the vagus nerve that runs from the human head to the heart is triggered. It sends a signal called a vasovagal or vagal scope. I don't want to say vaginal. Vasovagal scope to the heart that tells it to slow down, which reduces the blood flow to the brain. This signal happens for a lot of reasons: not eating enough, low blood sugar, lack of sleep. But why does it happen when people see blood? From an evolutionary standpoint, visible blood typically means someone is hurt. In our hunter and gatherer days, this was probably a result of an animal attack. To avoid being killed by an animal or by another human, our body shuts down and plays dead. Then that vasovagal scope kicks in, telling our heart to slow down and play dead, causing us to faint. The more a person sees blood, however, the less this response kicks in, which is why doctors and nurses can stomach the sight of blood better than, they say, a little kid. Someone with a little cut doesn't bother me. I've never seen someone like really injured where a lot of blood was coming out, so I don't know how I'd react to that. I don't have a problem with needles or if I cut myself. But I've never seen, and hopefully I'll never see blood in a large amount. But from what I've seen and experienced, it doesn't really bother me all that much. People are also afraid, no matter what age they are, they're afraid of the dark. A lot of kids and a lot of adults are afraid of the dark. Before kids are taught that bad things go bump in the night, they inherently fear the dark. And why is that? This fear stems from the fact that pre-evolutionary humans were most often hunted at night, and at that time, there were in fact beasts. Predatory animals like lions, tigers, and bears are known to hunt at night. Some bigger predators use the darkness as a cover to stalk their human prey. And we humans still hold on to that fear that we're being hunted by a big beast in the night. So when a little kid spends half the night scanning the closet and under the bed for a glowy-eyed creature, they're simply reacting to an age-old instinct to fear the darkness. So there are adults and kids that still fear the dark. That's why night lights are great. Excuse me. I can't sleep in total darkness. I have to have a night light. It's not because I'm scared of the dark necessarily, but if I need to get up for something, I need to see. I don't like the complete blackness, so I always have a night light wherever I sleep. People fear flying in an airplane. The fear of flying is a universal phobia like no other. And that's because fear of flight is a combination of multiple fears that a lot of people have, including the fear of heights, which we went over. The fear of flying has nothing to do with the fear of crashing. It's the perception your body has of being high above the ground and in a compact space. So you're getting the claustrophobia with the fear of heights combined there. While some people develop a fear of flying after a particularly bad flight, maybe a lot of turbulence or something, most people have the innate fear of being up so high in the air. Though, like many other fears, this can be helped through stress-reducing mental exercises. Now, I don't have a fear of flying. I don't like it because, you know me, folks. I don't like the mutants on the plane. I don't like the germs that come. You're in a tube. You're breathing everybody's germs. But what I always say is, now you're much more likely to die in a car accident than in a plane. Think of how many flights there are in a day in this country, and without incident, day after day, year after year. It's a much safer means of transportation, flying, than being in a car. A lot of people, thousands of people die on the ground in cars every year. But this is my logic all the time. Yeah, I'm more likely to die in a car, but at least if something goes wrong, the engine, something goes wrong in a car, I'm on the ground, I got a chance. Something happens major to a mechanical failure in the air, there's no backup, folks. Your whole life is depending on the maintenance and mechanics of that plane. And you're pretty much leaving it up to the mechanics, the airline, and for your safety, the FAA. There's a lot of people that have your life in their hands. Whereas if you're on the ground and your car just shuts down on the highway, yeah, you could have a semi coming 80 miles an hour behind you and kill you. It could happen. But the chances of you surviving a mechanical failure on the ground, I think, are a lot better than in a plane. So that's my only fear with flying, is that, the germs, the mutants, and of course, a mechanical failure. Now, we talked about claustrophobia, the fear of confined spaces. People also have a fear of open spaces, and that's called agoraphobia. While it's generally understood to be a fear of open spaces, agoraphobia is much more complex. It is a serious anxiety disorder that can trap people in their homes or make leading a normal life next to impossible. Some people with agoraphobia avoid specific places or venues. I don't have agora. I like being inside. I like being away from people. I also like having people over into my space, and I like going to other people's homes. Certain crowds stress me out nowadays. But I don't have a fear of leaving the house, but I'd much rather be home. People fear death, of course. Almost every other phobia on the planet centers around this one. Think about it. We're afraid of snakes. It's going to bite us. We're going to die. Spider's going to bite us. We're going to die. Claustrophobia. We're going to suffocate. We're going to die. So all phobias lead to death. Many, many do. We all instinctively seek to preserve ourselves and live longer. People have this fear for two main reasons. The first being, we have an innate desire to live. Humans have an innate desire to live. We are wired to survive. So a lot of our fears that we perceive as threats are part of the fear of death. Predatory death anxiety is the fear that something will literally kill us, be it an animal, a person, or a situation. Existential death anxiety is the knowledge that life will at some point end. It's another type of fear of death. This is a more powerful anxiety than predatory death anxiety because it's an internal fear. It stems from the fact that humans are self-aware with moral standards. So because humans have evolved to be intelligent, we also have evolved to have an innate fear of what happens when life ends, something other animals do not. I sit there and think about that sometimes when I'm laying in bed, falling asleep, and then I'm like, I'm going to die at some point. I don't know how or when, but I'm going to die. And then you think of scenarios of how you're going to die, when, what year. I mean, some people don't. I do. It's not something I obsess over, but it crosses my mind, especially when you get a little older. I don't know. It's not something I obsess over, but it crosses my mind. In addition to the fears just mentioned that we spoke about today, many of which are ingrained in our DNA, there are also fears that develop as children from our experiences and our environment. Just as our childhood shapes our personality, it's also likely to determine our greatest fears. And while some of us might have been fortunate enough to have left our deepest dreads in the past, along with potty training and pacifiers, the rest of us are stuck with crippling fear of everything from crowded spaces to cuddly canines. Curious as to what some of the most common childhood-turned-adult fears are? Well, we'll go over them. The fear of clowns. Our fear of clowns likely developed during childhood, but that doesn't mean it stayed there. According to a poll of nearly 2,000 Americans, adults are more afraid of clowns than they are of global warming. Maybe we all just need to stop watching so much American Horror Story. I've never feared clowns. I don't get it. I don't understand the fear of clowns. Maybe from movies, I don't get it. I don't particularly like clowns, but I'm not afraid of them. The fear of strangers. Fear of strangers is a crippling social anxiety, whatever you want to call it. It can affect your life well past adolescence. As a child, getting nervous around new people was cute and endearing. Now it just makes it nearly impossible for some people to function. And on the flip side of that, fear of being alone. As a child, nothing induces more fear than the mere thought of being left alone without a responsible adult in sight. But for some full-fledged adults, this worry persists beyond the younger years and morphs into autophobia, or the fear of being isolated and being ignored. Just look at the numbers. One survey found that 1 in 3 adults fear being on their own. Never had that fear. Moved out on my own at a very young age. Always had friends and family, but I like being alone. I enjoy it. I would have no problem living in the middle of the wilderness in a cabin by myself, maybe with an animal or a pet. No problem at all there, folks. No fear of being alone. Some people have the fear of needles. It affects more than just your mind. For people with the aversion, seeking a needle incites there's that word again, vasovagal response. I should have looked up how to say that before the podcast, but hey, that's what makes this podcast fun. We don't polish it up, folks. It's raw, it's unedited. You get what you get. It incites a vasovagal or vasovagal response, which in our heart rate and blood pressure quicken and subsequently drop. In other words, they pass out. So people pass out. People don't like shots, vaccinations. Maybe that's why these anti-vax people are so crazy. They don't like needles. Fear of lightning. In the United States, the odds of getting struck by lightning in any given year are about 1 in 700,000. Put that in perspective, folks. Your odds of being killed by fireworks are 1 in 340,000, yet an estimated 75% of people grapple with some degree or fear toward the electrostatic discharge. From children to adults to dogs, living things of all shapes and sizes are scared of this intimidating natural element. So there's nothing to be ashamed of if the threatening roars of thunder have you hiding under your desk for cover. It was just that story recently of the man walking his 3 dogs, got hit by lightning, and the people, thankfully there were people in the area that came and revived him and saved his life. They performed CPR and got him breathing and heart beating again. If you hear that thunder, they say, folks, you're within lightning strike distance. So if you hear that thunder, get inside or in a protected area. Like snakes and spiders, people fear bugs. According to the American Psychiatric Association, up to 40% of all phobias are related to bugs, mice, snakes, or bats. And arachnophobia, or fear of spiders, which we went over, plagues people more than the fear of losing their jobs, according to Chapman University. Basically, we're hardwired to really, really hate creepy crawly creatures. Now, I'm not afraid of bugs. Like, I'm not afraid. I just don't like them. You know, maybe for the germ aspect. I shouldn't. Wait, let me rewind that. I'm still afraid of bees, and we went over that, the whole childhood trauma I had with bees. You can go to previous episodes. You'll hear all about that. Bees I'm still afraid of, but other regular stuff, I'm not afraid of spiders. I don't like them. It's mostly bees. I just don't like insects in the house. Flies, from more of a germ and dirtiness standpoint, when a fly gets in the house, and I'm obsessed with getting that fly out until I kill it and get it out. Because I don't want it going on food, or you leave a drink out, it sits on the rim of your glass. Ugh, it's disgusting. So I'm more afraid of the germs that they bring than getting bit or dying from it. Fear of failure. Developing a fear of failure at an early age can have a detrimental effect on our learning habits well into our adult lives. One study published in the British Journal of Educational Psychology found that students who developed a fear of failure early on were more likely to cheat, to succeed, and only wanted to do well to validate their self-worth. Now, I overcame my fear of failure based on my mom. She would, you know how like some parents, I've said this before, they would let their kids win at a race or a board game. My mother would beat the fuck out of you at a board game, Monopoly, and then gloat, taunt you, put you down, everything. Little League, if I struck out, there was no, a strikeout, Johnny's just as good as a hit. My dad would yell from the stand, "You're stepping in the bucket. What are you afraid of the goddamn ball?" We were failure. We weren't coddled when we failed as kids, when we did something wrong. Like nowadays, I hear of the parents in the neighborhood, the kid can't even kick the ball 2 feet. Oh, that's great. It was so, no, you suck. We were told as kids when we sucked, we sucked. I wanted to join chorus. My mother looked at me and says, "You couldn't carry a note in a tote bag. You suck. Don't even bother. You're going to fail." They were realists. The parents in our generation, maybe people look at them now that it was child abuse, but they were realists. They prepared us for the real world, so when we failed at something later on, a whole world didn't crumble down around us. We knew what failure, and even getting it rubbed in our face a little bit was all about. So it didn't bother me very much later on in life when I failed at something, because it was just something in the childhood and the way we were raised. We prepared for it. Now, people have a fear of crowded spaces as well. When you're a child, it's only natural to get anxious in a crowded open space, but this fear plagues adults and children alike. According to Medical News Today, an estimated 1.8 million Americans that are over the age of 18 live with a fear of crowds or being outside alone. And we don't just mean a fear of walking through Times Square in New York City. Just for some people, just taking the elevator proves to be difficult, or just going out in public. Now, I know the only thing I fear now when I go out in crowds, and I know it's sick, but it's the times we live in, folks, with all these mass shootings. When I go into a venue, before I sit down and enjoy the show, I'm looking at where all the exits are. I'm gauging the people around me. It's because of the society we live in nowadays. It's not necessarily fear of the crowd itself. It's one nut job in the audience or coming by with a gun and shooting at everybody. So I'm always cognizant of where I'm sitting, where the exits are. I always take notes, mental notes, when I sit down or go someplace. Now, it's just a part of reality, unfortunately, that we've come to accept. But it is what it is now, folks. So that's what I do when I go out now. I'll enjoy the show or a concert or wherever I go. But when I first take my seat and when the lights are still on, I know exactly where the exits are. And I have a strategy in my head that if shit goes down, I know what to do. Now, believe it or not, this comes from scary movies and stuff, but people still fear as adults what's under their bed. There have been some scientific studies that have been done to determine just how many people suffer from this particular phobia. But a poll from the National Association of Sleep Comfort and Coziness, I can't believe there's even an association named the National Association of Sleep Comfort and Coziness, the NASCC, they found that a staggering 87% of Americans won't sleep with their feet outside of the blanket for fearing being snatched by the boogeyman or some creature. It might sound crazy, but we've watched enough horror movies to know how not to trust that empty space under our beds. Fear of ghosts. I mean, with Halloween, but something not just with Halloween, but all year round. Most of us are at least a little spooked after sitting around the bonfire listening to ghost stories that may or may not be folklore. But when it comes to the paranormal, some of us experience anxiety on an entirely different realm. And this crippling fear, known as phasmophobia, is positively correlated with the fear of dying, according to a study from Chapman University. I think that's what it is. I think people fear what's going to happen to them. They fear if there is a paranormal experience, if it's something friendly or evil. I totally get that. So fear of ghosts is still up there. Fear of aliens. And I'm not talking about build the wall, those kind of aliens that people are, well, some people are illegal aliens, they still call them. I'm talking about space aliens, folks. But I know in the times that we live in, I have to say, when I say fear of aliens, I have to specify which alien we're talking about. Alien abductions are quite common in movies and cartoons, but they are non-existent in the real world. And yet, a surprising number of people are afraid of extraterrestrials flying down in their UFOs and beaming us up with rays of bright light. Even the brilliant Stephen Hawking was notoriously fearful of meeting another form of life, saying meeting an advanced civilization would be like the Native Americans encountering Columbus, and that didn't turn out so well. So people fear an alien coming down from space or an extraterrestrial, whether they'll be friendly, whether they'll perform experiments, thought never crosses my mind. Never. Do I think there's life out there beyond Earth? Of course. I mean, with the universe as vast as it is, we'd be foolish to think we're the only life form in the entire universe. But do I sit in fear something landing and beaming me up? No. And to close it out, the fear of doctors. As a kid, your fear of going to the doctor is simple. The doctor is that person who gives you a needle, or, maybe it's painful. You associate it with being sick or pain. But as an adult, it's a bit more complicated. According to Dr. Barbara Cox, our post-adolescent anxieties about going to the doctor generally stem from our fears of receiving bad news. Many people feel anxious because they fear the unknown, and they let their imagination run wild. They may imagine a worst-case scenario when, in fact, going for, say, an annual checkup is the best prevention. Now, I'm guilty of this, folks. I don't fear the doctor or pain. I fear the bad news, possible bad news. I feel like if I'm feeling all right, I could drop dead tomorrow. We don't know, folks. I've seen healthier people just fall and drop. But I guess it's a phobia from when I saw my grandfather. He was pretty healthy all his life. Had a little incident, went to the doctor, they found cancer, he was dead in a few months. And I've seen this happen a few times, and I fear that bad news. So I think that's why I don't go regularly like I should. I should go, like I read. Prevention's the best thing. You catch something early. Your survival chances are a lot better. But it's that fear of the unknown and stuff. But it's something, as I'm getting older now, I'm going to have to be going to the doctors more, and I'm going to have to overcome, I guess you could say, that phobia, that fear of the bad news. So which one of these phobias can you relate with? Which ones do you have? And which ones what fears do you have that maybe I didn't talk about today? We'd love to hear from you in the comments. So when we post the show, in the show notes and the comments, definitely let us know what your fears and phobias are. And let us know if you can relate to any of the ones I spoke about today. Again, where are we found, folks? All major podcast platforms. If you want to be a sponsor of the show, we've had a few. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/abunchofmalarkey. Once we get a few more patrons, sponsors of the show, I'm going to be putting out extra content where it's going to be exclusive only to the patrons of the show. Once again, you'll still get this great weekly show that you enjoy so much on all the major podcast platforms at no charge. But if you want to become a donor or a patron of the show, a monthly donation, $1, $2, $5, whatever you can afford, you'll get bonus content, and that'll be coming up as soon as we get a few more patrons to the show. Reminder, the Mutant of the Week poll goes up on Tuesday, and it ends on Saturday. And we've got the Panty Plunderer, the guy who stole $10 out of his grandma's panties, against the SpongeBob Subutex, the guy who claimed to police that SpongeBob stole his paperwork and God was sending battleships, but hasn't launched them yet. So we got a pretty good battle, Memphis, Tennessee versus Louisiana. So, folks, nothing is more nerve-wracking than getting up on any given day knowing in the back of your mind you are bound to run into a mutant. It may be at the store, it may be on the road, it may be at a social event, it may be at work, but sooner or later the mutant will appear. And that's why, my friends, you always have to beware, because it's a shit show out there. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been A Bunch of Malarkey. We will talk to you next week. We hope you have a great week, everybody. Take care.